And what's really exciting about our work is that we get to learn about different industries. In my particular case, from airlines to music, chocolate, the whole works. And you really get to get deep into the industry through data. And also, you get to work with really cool economic experts. And these are top professors at like Harvard, Berkeley, Duke, and other universities. And you get to learn a lot from them.
Welcome back to Strategy Simplified. Today, we're joined by Prerna, a managing economist at Bates White, for a behind-the-scenes look at a landmark economic consulting case on music royalties. If you've ever wondered who decides what a song is worth and how, that's exactly what this episode covers. Quick note, Bates White is hiring. You'll find links to current openings in the show notes. They've got some amazing roles and a fun firm culture, which you'll hear about in this interview with Prerna. If you're curious about economic consulting, culture, and career growth, this episode is for you. Let's dive in.
So Prerna Rakheja is a managing economist at Bates White who specializes in antitrust and competition cases. She's worked on everything from airline mergers to music streaming disputes, helping legal teams and experts make sense of complex data and turning it into insights that non-technical audiences can actually use. Beyond her client work, Prerna has been a driver of firm culture. She helped launch annual cultural festivals, advocated for a new caregiver leave policy that's made a real difference for staff, and continues to mentor the next generation of consultants. She earned her PhD in economics from Johns Hopkins University, where she also taught courses in game theory, finance, and microeconomics. So obviously you are a total slacker. We're really going to have to just drag you along in the conversation today. No, seriously, very impressive background. Really excited to have you here. And as we kick off, Prerna, welcome to Strategy Simplified. I'd love for you to just share your journey first into economics. Why did you pick that field? How did you get there? A PhD in economics is not really something you stumble into. You do it on purpose. So we'd love to know a little bit about that. And then also what helped you pivot. And just for context, a lot of our listeners are some advanced degree folks who are thinking about making that same leap. Many are nervous because the field of academia is defined and certain, even though it's completely uncertain, but it's also certain. And then there's this kind of no rules environment over in consulting, which is just very, very different. There are also folks that are trying to differentiate between management and economic consulting. They're trying to understand some of those differences. And I'm assuming that you looked into many different options in the process. So yeah, we'd just love to know a little bit about your journey to where you are today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. So I'll start with what got me into economics. So my dad runs a shop in India, like a clothing store, and he's been doing it for over 50 years. So all through my childhood, I had the privilege of just hanging around there during summer vacations or weekends and just observing what's going on. And what always caught my attention was kind of the economics of the business. And I would notice things like, oh, the winter clothes are more expensive than the summer clothes. But also in India, most of the festivals are in the winter. So the margins are higher, but demand is higher. And a shop opened across the street. How does that change things? So when it was time for me to go to college, my choice of major was very obvious. I knew I wanted to study economics, and my love continued through my master's and my PhD.
I thought you were going to say fashion. I'm shocked. It was economics.
Yeah. But my discovery to Bates White was kind of accidental. When I was on the job market, I thought I was going to be an economics professor, but then COVID happened and not many schools were hiring. So I was kind of forced to see okay, what are other jobs out there that still would use my skill set and are fairly economics heavy, but are working on interesting problems. And I stumbled upon economic consulting. And Bates White in particular, amongst all the firms that I interviewed with, I just had a great interviewing experience, and they were very thoughtful with things like somebody had actually read my job market paper and asked very interesting questions. And, it was like a virtual 8-hour interview, but they had factored in time for me to take a break and use the restroom, which is not, it sounds simple, but not everybody was doing at the time. It was a new concept to do things virtually. And that's how I kind of pivoted towards Bates White.
I love it. Well, somebody once told me that if you're not sure about the quality of a company, you should always check out their bathrooms. But I've never thought about you should check out their policy on bathroom breaks. So that's pretty great, actually, to understand that. I love that you've discovered, the excellence of culture along the way. That's one of the reasons we really enjoy speaking to folks from Bates White and hearing about what you do. So I'm really excited for this conversation today. For those that are new to economic consulting, can you describe what the heck it is you do? It sounds like you're consulting on the economy, but obviously, just from what you described a little bit there, you're not. I know what it is, but I think for our listeners, especially those that may be new to the field or exploring the field, it'd be great to know a little bit about how you would describe the work that you do.
Yeah, so my sponsor, Randy at Burke, once said this to me, and it really stuck with me, that at a very high level, we are doing maths for lawyers. But more specifically, if a company gets pulled up for anti-competitive behavior, for example, monopolization, like in the current Google Act tech case, or price fixing, like the vitamins cartel in the early 2000s, or if the government wants to block a merger, for example, recently, from the recent past, the JetBlue Spirit airline merger, which is also something I worked on. These companies then hire antitrust lawyers to represent them in court. But the courts in such cases also care about what is the opinion of economic experts in the field. And that's where we come in. We provide expert economic testimony because we're able to, once we have access to all the data, we're able to analyze it and tell what patterns the data are supporting in terms of the economics of the case. And what's really exciting about our work is that we get to learn about different industries. In my particular case, from airlines to music, chocolate, the whole works. And you really get to get deep into the industry through data. And also, you get to work with really cool economic experts. And these are top professors at like Harvard, Berkeley, Duke, and other universities. And you get to learn a lot from them.
I love that you use the words cool economic experts in the same line. I think that tells us a lot about you and what gets you excited. So that's a good filter for people. If they would also be thrilled to meet with those cool economic experts, this might be the place for you. Well, I want to dive into a specific case, the music streaming case. And I wanted to talk about this music streaming royalty case. I think this is something that a lot of us grew up with. And just for a little bit of context, I'm ancient. I'm literally ancient history. And so this was something where in college, right, we had Napster and downloads of like free music left and right and hard drives of music on it. And it was kind of a good life for the consumer at the time. But obviously it was terrible for musicians and challenging for these companies. But I would guess that most people, even me, who have been through this like ancient history of music streaming and royalty, don't really understand what the context of this case was. So can you walk us a little back through some of the players and then also some of the specifics of this case as well as its importance?
Yeah, absolutely. This was my first case at the firm, and I had a great time working on it. I'm always excited to talk about it. And I'm so glad you mentioned Napster and piracy because we are going to touch on that. So this case is more commonly known as the Phonorecords 4 case. And at a very high level, in this case, we were trying to solve for what the price of music should be. And more specifically, this case was about mechanical royalty rates that are paid by interactive music streaming services such as Spotify, Apple Music, etc. Mechanical royalty rates are royalties that are paid to songwriters and music publishers for the composition of the music. So think the lyrics and the sheet music whenever their song is reproduced or streamed. And these are different from sound recording royalties that are due to the actual performing artist and the record label for the performance of the song. So for example, if you were to stream a song that Taylor Swift wrote and sang on Spotify, then she and the publisher and label should get both the mechanical works and the sound recording royalties. But if you play a Taylor Swift song that was sung by a cover artist, and the cover artist and label get the sound recording royalty, but Taylor Swift and publishers still get the musical or the mechanical work royalties. And this case was about negotiation of this mechanical work royalties. And it's important because it's trying to solve essentially for the economic value of music, which is different from the social value of music in this evolving music industry. So going back to the 90s, there used to be CDs and cassettes, which became MP3 files. And for the past decade or so, streaming services have been kind of transformational in this space. And back then with CDs and cassettes, it was kind of simple. A proportion of the sales value would go as mechanical work royalties. And then there was this period of music piracy where the format of music was more digital and comparable to what it is today, but the content creators were not getting compensated for their work. And now with Spotify and other streaming services, you pay roughly the price of a CD every month, but you get access to 100 million songs. And this makes the calculation and the distribution of these royalties a lot more complicated. In light of this rapidly changing environment, interactive streaming services and copyright owners need in front of the Copyright Royalty Board. I realize I'm saying copyright a lot, but I promise this will be the last of it.
It seems like copyright's important, right?
That is important. That's what the case is about. But they meet roughly every 5 years to determine what these rates should be. And the goal in Phonorecords 4, which is the case that we're talking about, the standard that was set by the judges, the CRB judges, was to determine a market-based rate. So think of it as what would the rate be if there were to be a negotiation between a willing buyer and a willing seller?
So, when I think about this really simplistically, let me tell you the math that's in my head, because maybe this will also help you articulate what some of the challenges are. But I think I always just assumed, as a consumer of these services, that everybody shares a percentage of the plays, right? So you just add up, this is the very simple math in my head, that if the total number of streams was 222 million and there were, 90,000 accounts that were paid, then, we just divide 222 million into the revenue earned on the 90,000 minus some proportion for the music streaming service. And then the rest of it is all paid out evenly. So obviously that's not what's happening, right? It's not as simple as that. But maybe as you go on, you could explain who thinks they should get more or less, where the contention is and why that equal, simple split that I imagine would be the way that it would go, what might not be that way. So do you want to just kind of layer into that? Because after that, I want to talk a little bit about your team and the work that you did. But could you just help us understand the sticking point in this case, and maybe just make fun of me a little bit for my very simplistic understanding?
Yeah. So I gave a very simplistic view that there's this musical work royalties, but there are different components. Like I said, the sound recording royalty. And also these music streaming services have their own share of operating costs that they need to account for. What costs, what exactly they host is also part of it, right? Sometimes now you also get audiobooks. Should those be compensated similar to songs? So there are a lot of different moving pieces in there. Conceptually, your idea is along the right direction, that the royalties should be a proportion of the revenue that the streaming services make. But what proportion should that be? And that's kind of what we're trying to solve for.
So the big sticking point wasn't necessarily how you divide between Jenny Ray's son, who makes a guitar special in his room, and Taylor Swift. It's more the all of the artists, or the artists and publishing companies and the streaming companies. Am I right about that?
Yeah, because now on this platform, you're no longer buying one Beatles album. You get access to all the music with this monthly price you pay. So the back-end calculation is done more at this pool level. A royalty pool is calculated, and then it's split in some way amongst all the different artists.
And I'm guessing, shock of all shocks, that the platforms felt like they deserved more of the amount, and that this was that the contention was that the artists were like, hey, you got to pay the actual piper, right? Like you actually have to pay the person who is singing or piping or like making the content. Am I right about that? Again, I just want to understand the players.
I mean, yeah, exactly. So the artists are bringing kind of the content on the platform, but also the platform is serving that gap between the music, bringing that music from the artist to the consumer. So they also sort of have a contribution and are making sort of contribution in the industry that hasn't been made or is new, and they need to be compensated for it. So there is everyone's trying to get a share of the pie. And our job is to kind of make sure we're getting at an economic answer to it, because there can be different ways of looking at it.
Yeah. And just to draw parallels like outside of your work, but someone like Netflix would pay the organization usually on a flat rate, not on a usage basis, right? So those royalties would be defined, and they also have developed their own in-house content production, both algorithm and process where they completely own all of the content. And so, as those are a little bit different is what you're saying. Like it's also content, but those have evolved maybe to a different place than some of these music streaming orgs.
Yeah, it kind of like there are different incentives, right? If you base it on the number of times a song is streamed, for example, that changes the incentives. The artists will want to make smaller songs, and the streaming services will want all the songs to be really long. So there are many different sort of factors at play that would change the incentives of how it is. But yes, it's not on a flat rate basis. It's mostly a pool is determined based on all the streaming services revenue, and that pool is distributed amongst the various artists.
Which is interesting, right? Such a frontier again, because there just isn't really an example of this type of distribution even in other content cases. So let's talk a little bit about the Bates White mechanics. I want to get, a visual inside your office. Like I'm imagining that this is a couple of people, but I don't know how many. So tell us, right? Who was on the team? Who are the players? What the heck were you guys doing? Because now we understand what the problem is, but like, what did the collaboration look like day to day? How often were you interacting with the client? Can you just tell us a little bit about the team dynamics?
Yeah, sure. So in this particular case, the economic expert that was hired was Professor Joe Farrell, who's also a partner at Bates White, but he's also a professor of economics at UC Berkeley. And he was supported by a team of about, I would say, 5 to 8 people that kind of ebbed and flowed depending on how busy we were. But I was kind of on the case, which went on for a while, almost the entire time, and I learned a lot. And the day-to-day pretty much involved data analysis, discussion of results with Joe, who was the expert, the actual writing of the report, getting on a bunch of client calls to make sure we have all the right data and the information to do our analysis. And a lot of time is actually also spent on just quality control. So making sure what we're doing is accurate, making sure the code is right, making sure the writing is accurately reflecting the results. Because as part of the litigation, not only do we have to do this analysis, we have to submit kind of what we call the backup, which is essentially all the data and the code and everything that we wrote to court, and it gets vetted. So there's a lot of focus on also just making sure everything's correct and then packaging it up in a way that it's comprehensive.
Hey, Management Consultant family, do you want the inside track on consulting recruiting? Then make sure that you're subscribed to Management Consulted on YouTube. We cover everything from digital assessments and case interview prep to resumes, cover letters, breaking industry news and salary trends, and so much more with new videos every single week. Whether you're an undergrad, an MBA, an advanced professional degree, a working professional, or someone else, we'd love to help you prepare with confidence to land your dream consulting offer. Head over to YouTube, search Management Consulted, and hit subscribe so you never miss an update.
Okay, and so you were on the team. Were there other people though that switched on and off of the team, and why would those kind of switches happen? Just curious about that as well.
Yeah, so I mean, there was there were other partners and more senior people, but then also more junior people and mid-level management people, which is kind of the role where I'm at now, but wasn't it back then. And they would switch primarily because, once the workflow is decided, you know what you're doing and the team is working on it, the more senior people can also contribute on other cases. And so they would be spending a little bit less time. Like they would be not working on it full time, but then as the deadline gets closer for the report submission, it's kind of all hands on deck. Everyone is spending all their time on it. So that's kind of what the variation is typically driven by.
I love it. Okay, that's helpful. One more thing here. Can you just tell us a little bit about the data sources for this? Like I'm imagining that this would have been really interesting from a data source perspective. Where were you looking for data? Where did you find it? Because on the workflow side, I just imagine that was a big piece of what you were putting together.
Yeah, so we essentially end up using both publicly available data sources and data that become available as part of the litigation discovery process. So publicly, whatever data is available on revenue through royalties from, I think it was called the NMPA, National Music Publishers Association. So we're looking for all kinds of public data that's available through our own research, but then also we kind of inherit a bunch of data as part of the actual litigation discovery process that the companies are supposed to release to the other side. And the other side, i.e. the copyright owners, also are obligated to release their data. So we get access to that as part of the litigation.
Okay, very helpful. So then what made the case challenging for you or interesting or both? For you and the team, you said you stayed on the case for quite a long time. And I'm guessing some of that, right, you're new at a consulting firm. Some of that is like, congratulations, this is your case. And then some of that is like, especially as you are there for a little bit longer, it's like, I would like to stay, right? So can you just tell me where that challenging, interesting conundrum was and where you kind of found yourself on there?
Yeah, so I'll start with what was challenging for me at the time and then talk about what was challenging, I thought, for the team as a whole, which included. So for me personally, it was the change of audience. I was fresh out of grad school and I was used to presenting my research work to economic professors who are very welcoming of all the complex mathematical equations and economic jargon. However, on the case inside the firm, I was still pretty much immersed in all the complicated stuff. But any communication of findings outside the firm was targeted at lawyers or at judges. So I had to learn and continue to learn how to simply explain what we do to make it more digestible for the general audience. And for the team as a whole, I would say it was building the economic model to determine the royalty rates. And that's because this was totally new. It had not been done before. Prior proceedings had focused mostly of looking on benchmark rates. So you could think of, what are the royalty rates that are being paid by sound recording royalties? Or what was paid last year? And let's extrapolate from that. Not to say that that's wrong. That is a candidate way of determining what the royalty rates should be. But in Phonorecords 4, and that's also something we did in our report, but in Phonorecords 4, one of the judges was particularly keen on the economics behind the royalty rates. And so, because it's always comforting for the judges to see different approaches kind of leading to similar ballpark numbers. So bridging that gap to build an economic model was both interesting and challenging for the team as a whole.
Very interesting. Okay, I love it. Well, can you share an example of, you mentioned earlier, like math for lawyers? I was imagining like comedy skits that I've seen where people are like, I took college classes and they were called math. And that's when I knew I wasn't going to be a mathematician. But, can you, just give us an example of how you helped translate some of this data that you got from these public and private sources to clear insights for these non-technical audiences, which I'm guessing included both lawyers as well as other, parties in the conversation. But yeah, how'd you do it? How'd you take your economic magic and make it simple?
So I'll try and explain simply kind of what was this economic model that we built, like what was it doing? That'll help and give some insight into how we did it. Me and my team developed an economic model that essentially mimics a hypothetical negotiation between Spotify and a small music publisher using something called the Nash bargaining framework. It sounds complicated, but it's a mathematical framework that is used to determine how two parties can divide the gains from trade equally. In this particular case, the trade was Spotify hosting a music publisher's music, let's call Prerna's album on Spotify, right? So
Wait, but do you
Spotify's
have one? I do need to know that. This is very critical.
not yet.
Okay.
One of our team members on the case back then did actually have one on Spotify. So it was a running joke and we kept coming back to it.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, we're gonna need to get the link to that so that we can make sure that we put that out on the pod. But yeah, sorry, keep going. I totally interrupted your flow of thought.
It's all good. So going back to the trade and the gains from trade. Spotify's gains from trade in this case would be the profit it would make if it strikes a deal with this publisher versus the subscribers it would lose because they cannot find their favorite Prerna's album on Spotify. And so you have to think about estimating how many subscribers would be lost and also what would be the effect of those lost subscribers on profit, both through revenue and through cost. Similarly, for the music publisher, the model is trying to capture gains from trade from the deal going through. That would be the royalties that the music publisher would earn from Spotify versus the opportunity cost. And opportunity cost is a key concept in economics. You can think of it as the next best alternative. So if the deal doesn't happen, the music publisher doesn't necessarily earn zero, but it could strike a deal with an other streaming service or satellite radio or through vinyl sales, like those are making a comeback. And simply then you're trying to equate the gains from trade for the two parties to solve for the optimal rate. So I'm trying to explain this all in words, but in reality, behind estimating and solving this model is all these public and private sources of data that are going into a complex computer code that we as economists are trained to kind of work through and solve for an optimal solution, which in this particular case was the market-based royalty rate.
So it's not add up the pie, divide the pie. It's more complicated than that.
It's more complicated.
I love this. But then can I just also press on one thing just to make sure I understand it. So what I hear you say is that you weren't even creating a new formula. You were using a tested, tried process of fairly dividing this in order to present an alternative to the current way that it was being done. Am I right about that? Like there was a way that it was being done. Parties weren't happy. This one was not just a like, here's a new way, but also this is a new way based in foundational, tested mathematical principles.
So yeah, I think the only thing I would say is not that the old way was wrong. It's very much so in any kind of competition economic litigation case, you can almost never present just one way of doing things because what's the validation that that's the right way of doing it and that's the right answer, right? So you got to do.
Yeah, I guess the only reason that it's wrong is that we're in court, right? Like we're fighting about it.
Yeah, and the previous way had also very much worked in court, but because one of the judges was interested in the economics of the case, we had to go through the economics literature and find a model which is well accepted. Actually, it's based on John Nash's work in game theory, and he won a Nobel Prize for it. So it's very well accepted. But we had to kind of adjust it to our setting to be able to mimic this negotiation that would try and get at a market-based rate.
Very good. Okay. Thank you. That's super helpful. Again, sometimes when I say things in the simplest wrong possible way, it's helpful to figure out what's wrong about it. So I think you did a very elegant job of describing what was terribly wrong about my assumption. Good. Well, let me just add one final thing about the case, and then I'd love to just talk really quickly about Bates White. And so last question about the case. What's the real world impact the team's work had on strong songwriters, streaming platforms, and even on streaming listeners? Tell me what the outcome was. Because again, I don't know that a lot of us would have seen this, but I know it was really, really, really major.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So let's go through them all one at a time. So for the streaming platforms like our client Spotify, who pays the artists, they essentially got math validated market-based rates. And this is important because it helps them ensure that their costs won't skyrocket, because royalties are an important cost of these streaming platforms. And Phonorecords 3 was a long legal battle with appeals and whatnot. So with Phonorecords 4, they also avoided years of litigation and associated costs. For the songwriters, they got a significant increase in royalty rates in the Phonorecords 4 proceeding. It is more nuanced, but a simple way of thinking about it, that they got essentially a 50% increase from 10% of streaming services revenue to 15%, around about 15%. And then for the streaming listeners, I would say they had two really important benefits. One is access to music. So the fact that artists are getting well compensated helps prevent situations like in 2014 when Taylor Swift pulled off her music from Spotify. And second, it also the consumers also get expanded offerings. So if you notice, there's been a lot of innovation by the streaming services on how there are now like family plans, and there are bundled subscriptions where you get access to some audiobooks along with music. And this is all somewhat driven by how royalties are calculated behind the scenes for all the different offerings.
I will never be able to look at it the same. I can't wait. I can't wait to like go in and test things out and think about how it would impact this. Thank you so much for bringing it to light. I want to just go now just to talk a little bit about you before we wrap up. So what does a typical day look like for you now as a managing economist? You mentioned you had a different role when you were on this project. And now congratulations, you've been promoted. But what does it look like? What do you do now?
Yeah, honestly, no 2 days are the same, but broadly speaking, there's like 4 or 5 buckets of things that I'm working on. How much time I spend on them or with what industry I'm working on will keep changing from day to day. But there's a lot of thinking time because as a managing economist, I'm responsible to come up with what is the content of our analysis going to look like, building these economic models, making sure the data are being run through established metrics that we use. There's also the people side of things that I have to think about, like who should work on what is our project timeline, what is the work plan for this week, for the upcoming month, etc. There's a lot of reviewing of work that I have to do. So I'm responsible for organizing and executing the team's work, but also I love to give them the responsibility and the freedom to run with it. But then it comes back to me to make sure nothing was slipped through the cracks. And if there's any way we can improve on it, then I'm providing that input. There's a lot of client calls, talking to the different clients and lawyers, making sure we have everything we need to get the work done, and also communicating on case progress, etc. And then I also have to do a lot of firm building activities as part of managing economist. You're officially like leadership. So, going for coffee chats, catching up for lunch with peer coaches. But I honestly really enjoy that. I love getting to know the people I work with outside of casework.
I love it. Well, you've also gone beyond your formal responsibilities for things like festivals, new policies. Why? Why do you care so much? And what really drives you to kind of contribute outside of those, defined expectations?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it's just the people. That's, as you said, like the culture of the firm is really important. And that's kind of what it keeps coming back to. The culture
So
is
many
kind of
bathroom
what you
breaks.
make it. Yeah.
Totally.
And so that just keeps me motivated. Also, I love food and anything food related. So a lot of these festivals and all are kind of my sneaky way of getting to eat all the different food that people at our firm, which are from all over the world, have to offer. So
I love it. I'm self-inviting myself. Okay. Great. Now that you've been with the firm for over 4 years, what's been the most rewarding part of your personal career journey at Bates White?
yeah, I think it's been just personal and professional growth. As a PhD student, we are taught to be really rigorous and detailed with our research, but in the professional environment, you kind of have to learn to balance that with kind of, the 80-20, getting the deliverable out the door, making sure you're focusing on the important pieces first. And just, I've been learning a lot how to work with experts in legal settings and planning a project and working in different industries. Honestly, like 4 years ago, I couldn't have imagined myself managing a team of 10 plus people. And really, it just truly gets the imposter syndrome that is deep down every PhD student's soul out. So it has really helped me build confidence in my competence.
I love that. What's a key indicator someone would be a great fit for Bates White? You can also answer this in the flip, which is like, you saw culture as one of the things, but obviously culture is a big indicator, but there's other work to be done and other things that need to happen. So if you've seen anybody really struggle and you can kind of identify why, so for somebody to opt out appropriately, you can answer on either side of that, whichever way you think is easier to describe.
Yeah, so I think what makes people a good fit is generally what I've observed is people who have an analytical way of thinking, but also love working with data, because at the end of the day, we do work with a lot of data. Like in our world, it's not uncommon to have millions of observations on most of our cases. And someone who kind of thrives in in a problem solving environment, doesn't get sort of intimidated by it, can figure their way. Not to say that they should already have all these qualities, but I think if they're curious and interested in building these qualities, that also goes a long way.
Love it. Um, Last ones, just for other candidates, their recommendations. So first of all, what are 2 tips for candidates to stand out in the application and interview process?
Yeah, it's so funny. Like I started interviewing a few years ago now, and it was so weird to be on the other side. But once you're on the other side, it's actually like you realize that good candidates are not that hard to pick out. And few things that I think really stand out is people who do their homework. So good candidates already know what the role is, what the career trajectory is. They had really smart questions up their sleeve. And I think the way to do that is to set up calls with people in that role prior to applying, and people 2 to 3 years ahead in that role also prior to applying. And the second I would say is those who show curiosity to learn. So you don't have to be, I know everything about this kind of, you don't have to bring that. I
Hopefully, I've
especially,
demonstrated that significantly today for everyone.
but I especially love folks who are searching for what they don't know and are asking genuine questions to learn about it.
That's gorgeous. Thank you. Well, we'll put the links in the episode to connect with Bates White, open opportunities. But do you have any final words of wisdom or encouragement for somebody considering a role with the firm?
Yeah, I would just say don't be shy to reach out. Like, reach out, learn about what we do. And even if you're not sure about it, you might be surprised. So have a conversation. For undergrads, we actually have a great summer consultant program that kinds of give you this nice, sweet window to get into experiencing what we do. And our PhD recruiting is going to start in October. So that's coming up.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, let me just say one thing. I loved, like, shock and horror. If you do your homework and you network, I think that's it's a number one myth buster that I have to contend with, because people are kind of like, but do I really have to? Like, I don't know if it's I don't know if it's a thing. And I kind of just, I'm like, yes. I mean, only if you want the job, right? Like, but if you don't want it, don't worry about it. But I'm really glad that you emphasized that today. Well, I just want to wrap up with a couple of really fast, really fun questions. Thank you so much for your time today. It was really an interesting conversation. But we need to know a few fun facts about you as we leave the time together. So first of all, what is your favorite hiking spot or trail? Also, can you please provide the pin for it so that we can put it into the
Okay.
into the pod? Yeah, tell us everything.
So I recently went to Crater National Park and swam in the Crater Lake, and that was amazing. More locally in the DC area, I love the Billy Goat Trail. I also did a trail in Seattle in Olympic National Park. It was like you climb really high up and you get to see the crescent of Lake Crescent. I'll provide the link, but I don't remember the exact name of that.
That's fantastic. Crater Lake is just a day trip from my house. So I'm really glad that you loved that one. Yeah, it's pretty special. Okay, great. Best book or podcast you've enjoyed recently and why?
Ooh, I've really been enjoying listening to Acquired, this podcast. They go like deep into the workings of businesses and, going back to my childhood story. Clearly, I enjoy that. So I've been really loving listening to that.
That's awesome. Our related podcast, Market Outsiders, go shallow into businesses. And it's also, we kind of say like it's the shallow acquired, right? So for people that want to have like a quick and dirty view on daily business news, but Acquired is pretty special and fantastic. I'm glad you're loving it. Awesome. The career that you'd want to try if you weren't an economist is the last question.
Probably something food related. Like I would love to be one of those people, who get to travel the world and eat different food and, make a TV show about it or something.
I can see what our first in-person meeting is going to involve. There's going to be hiking and food 100%.
Yes.
I'm looking forward to
We
it.
have to do it.
Awesome. Prerna, really enjoyed having you on the pod today and really appreciate your perspective. Congratulations on the culmination of that great work from the case that you shared. And thank you for illuminating the culture at Bates White. So really enjoyed it. I hope you have a great rest of your day. Thanks again.
Thank you. You too.
That's all for today's episode. Thanks for tuning in. A huge shout out to Prerna for sharing her journey and to Bates White for giving us a look at a really cool case. If you're considering a career in economic consulting, then Bates White is actively hiring. Check out the links below to explore open roles and to learn more about the firm. As always, you can find more resources and prep support at managementconsulted.com and in the show notes. Thanks for listening. We'll see you again soon.